Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
For people who are not aware of the, I don't know if custom is the right word, of Segulot or skulas, of, you can call them superstitious customs, actions, things that, for example, engagement challah, the idea of passing around the engagement challah. So there a lot of Segulot have to do specifically around birth and fertility. A lot have to do around, most of it have to do around, what was that? Parnasa, yeah. So most have to do something with Parnasa, with financial well-being. And Segulot also, I think, generally speaking, are more associated with women than men. They're certainly not exclusively, which is also connected with why challah, baking, and candle lighting and things like that are often areas in which there's all kinds of segulot that people do. By the way, maybe, you know what? I have an idea. Are there any segulot that come to mind for people here that either like your Bobby did, your mom did, you do, things that are like weird practices, like, baking your key into your challah right after Pesach, right? That would count as a segula. Or, breaking a plate at a wedding before connected to the Tanai, right? All things like that, different segulot. Denise, is that you have an example?
Yeah, but you gave enough. It's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I'm wondering what's the difference between a segula, if I'm saying that correctly, and an ordinary custom. Example, when people whose parents are alive leave for Yizkor. I know that's a minhag, but is it of the quality of segula that if someone stayed in, they'd be ill-wishing their immediate family?
Yes.
I'm just kind of
wondering. I would put
parameters.
Yes, so I would put that in the category of segula. We talk. So in the Talmud, the Talmud I don't think ever actually uses the word segula to talk about these kinds of customs, but the kinds of examples that they give are when someone says like, oh, my bread fell out of my mouth or my staff fell out of my hand, that means I shouldn't go on this journey today. It's like, it's just going to be a bad day kind of thing, right? Or, like things like that or don't collect money from me on Rosh Chodesh or on Motzei Shabbat because I don't want to start off the month with a loss, a financial loss, right? So all of that stuff count, put in that category. Whether you call it a segula, I'm using segula as kind of a catch-all term. So yeah, I would absolutely consider walking out for Yizkor to be in that category.
And I think that it becomes a minhag, right? It doesn't start. There are different categories of minhagim. So there are things called like minhag kehalacha, which means if you've done something enough in a community or by way of Jewish law that it now has become as if it is Jewish law, though it actually is not. Some people would say that kippah goes in that category. But the leaving during Yizkor, if you don't have someone to say Yizkor for, probably became a minhag in the way that we're using the word minhag to just mean general custom from this idea of a superstitious practice or custom. But in terms of the differences, I would say that a custom is just something that's done a lot as opposed to coming with, I don't know what other word to use, like some kind of superstition or some kind of fear behind it or hope behind it that would then lead you to do something over and over again. Does that make sense?
It's like when you compliment somebody like your child and you go poo poo poo, exactly. Like you're not supposed to be saying that, but that's that's kind of what you're saying, I think.
Right, or
so
like throwing salt over your shoulder, that's a thing apparently, right? That's
yeah. Though I don't know if that's Jewish or if that's just a Eastern European custom. I think it's Eastern European.
Well, so many of them are adopted, right?
Yeah,
so,
okay.
From non-Jewish places, right? But
right. Steve has his hands up, so maybe he has a suggestion or an example.
I've actually heard this one a couple times, is that if your family, your household is having bad luck, to check your mezuzahs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Just so funny. Yes.
Yeah. Which is funny because Rabbi Schatz, I feel like when I mentioned something about Segulot, you're like, I don't know anyone who does those.
I know, because I didn't really, when you brought, Rabbi Pernick and I could do a class on how we pick the topics for the class, because it's actually probably more entertaining than the class is. But when you mentioned it, I was like, no one's going to know what that is. The examples help us know what it is. Like the checking of mezuzahs, I feel like some people do, but it's more so, and we're going to get into this in a second. And then, Rabbi Pernick, you can answer Michael's question based on your source sheet.
Yeah. My dad asked the same question. So.
What?
I said my dad asked the same question also. So.
Oh, great. Did he also look up your birthday? I hope he had things to do on your birthday.
He was watching Jeopardy.
But, oh, great. Well, you were not the first child. I was. So I think that there are elements of like checking your mezuzahs or eating the challah after a wedding that come with this yearning for hope, right? Even I would say, and it's not a segula, but saying the Misha Berach for someone who is fatally ill, right? That you are doing something that is going to make you feel like there's more hope or opportunity or reasoning behind whatever's happening in your life. And so you check your mezuzah, because what if in the mezuzah there's something wrong, and then if you get a kosher mezuzah, then everything will be fine. So I do think that's where these examples make it known to us that we do more of this than we expect. I just wasn't sure that people would actually know the term. So
yeah, well, and so going back to the term, because a couple of questions about that. So we asked, does this relate to my dad asked, does this relate to Am Segula? And so the answer seems to be yes, right? So 4 times in the Torah, which I know because we looked it up earlier in the pre-class class, right? But the first time is in the book of Exodus, where it says, if you observe faithfully, obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, Vitem li segula mikol ha'amim. You shall be a segula to me from amongst the nations. Kili kol haaretz, for all the earth is mine. And every time the word segula appears in the Torah, it's kind of in this context of an am segula, which often is translated something like here, like my treasured possession among all the peoples. But the Or HaChaim, who's an 18th century rabbinic commentator, whose name I forget, translates Vitam li segula. He says the term segula means something possessing supernatural properties as a result of which we view it as a treasure. It does not need to possess intrinsic value. He says there are herbs, for instance, which are cold by nature and yet are known to be an antidote to cold, something illogical within nature as we know it. He says, God promises the Jewish people that as a result of their listening to his commandments and observing them, they will become such a people for God, a people whose history defies all accepted norms. So the idea here of segula is something that is sort of defies natural explanation. It's sort of above, supernatural, right? Above nature. And so when God says, Vitem li segula, you're going to be a segula, it's actually connected as sort of this thing that's like, again, supernatural. It is, nature cannot explain it, but it, like Jewish history, which often does not follow a trajectory that would seem to make sense historically. So that's kind of this idea of segula. I have to stop share to see or adding a name when someone is sick totally fits exactly in the same category. So, right, there's a whole conversation about what kind of segulot are, allowed, right? You're not allowed to do divination of any sort, right? So that's kind of where it comes in, is where do you draw the line between segulots and, menachesh, which is one of the types of divination that's prohibited. When it comes specifically to the weddings and so forth, though, I'll just, here it talks about, different things that rabbis in the Talmud would do, that they, would check what would happen by opening a scroll and reading whatever it would open to, and would see that as a sign. Rabbi Yochanan would check what was in store by asking a child to recite the verse he was learning, and that was, based on that verse, he would sort of, determine what was going to happen to him. But there's this teaching here in Chulin, which I think is interesting, which says, with regard to one who is successful after he has built a home or after the birth of a child or after engagement or so forth, right? Even though you can't use that as divination, it's an auspicious sign that you'll continue to be successful. And then the opposite is true as well. And I think that kind of plays into the way a lot of the Segulot that we have around engagement, right? People praying under the chuppah, the challah, engagement challah, like all of these kinds of things kind of play into that auspiciousness of the time. Someone who is succeeding, whether they're just getting married, they just had a baby, they just have whatever the thing may be, like there's something auspicious about the time that they are in. And so if they pray for you, it could help you. It sort of reminds me, has anyone ever been to like a real Hasidic tish? Anyone? Okay, Judith has. I know I went with one of my rabbis in yeshiva who's a Belzer Chassid, and I spent Shabbos with him, and we went to a tish, and the Rebbe sort of hands out like some fruits and some like cake. There's some kind of a cake that they make, and he hands out pieces of cake, and it's this whole thing that like people are like rushing to the front to try to get the cake that he's handing.
It's actually mostly men, isn't it? Mostly the men are at the tish, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't really there. I kind of looked in. My husband was in there.
Okay. So, yeah.
But that's exactly what happens in our episode, right? It's not from a Rebbe, but it's from a wedding, which is for those of you who didn't catch on to exactly what was happening, because it was a little bit of a random moment. A woman came in, I think it was her daughter who had gotten married, and she gave out pieces of challah from the wedding that had obviously been used to say motzi over at the Suda following the ceremony. And that challah was given out to all of the unmarried women in the room to be this way of, if you have a piece of this challah from the wedding, like it'll hopefully soon buy you, is what you would
the bouquet,
say.
Right? It's the bouquet kind of feeling thing.
Right?
Yeah, people throw the bouquet, non-Jewish weddings and like that.
Yeah, but the bouquet is only caught by one person.
Right.
I think. I've actually never experienced that in my life. I've only seen it in movies. But I think it's done only once. So the challah is a little bit more inclusive to just anybody who needs that blessing or wants that blessing of getting married. And interestingly, what's her name?
Odaya.
Thank you. Says, no, I don't need it. And the woman's response is, oh, did you already find somebody? She's like, no, but I don't need a piece of stale challah from a wedding.
And she's like, you don't have to be frum, right? The person says something about like, you don't have to be frum. Like it's
right.
for non-religious people too.
Right. The blessing works even if you're not frum.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah, Renee.
So one of Idan's friends from Aish got married, and before she got married, she asked for a list of all the people that were still single, so that she could make a special bracha for them.
Yeah.
In her zchut.
Mm-hmm.
Very much a thing.
I was just gonna say, Rabbi Pernick can talk about that. You sometimes see that. You see it right before weddings that people send. Even I've seen it also sent out on Facebook nowadays, and it's just such a weird thing to say. Add your name to this list so that I can pray for you on my wedding. I've never actually opened one of those documents, but I think that it's a little bit bizarre.
You've never seen a man do that, though. Only women, right?
I've never seen a man do that.
No, it's just. I think that's a specific.
It's just the women that do it.
Yeah. But also the women during Kabbalat Panim, that's what they're doing. I mean, they're in a traditional community. They're like davening, Tehillim and saying people's names and giving them brachot and all those things. But men don't really have that because they're at their tish and getting drunk and signing ketubas and whatnot. I guess ketubah, only one ketubah, but yeah, and it also happens around names for people who are ill. You'll hear of people reading Tehillim, like groups of people reading Tehillim so that person should get better soon. So yes, names is definitely the collection of names is definitely
or changing names.
Or changing names. Yes, true.
People here in New Orleans, might know someone who's mashgiach here who changed his name because he was having had health problems and changed his name or dropped his middle name and start going by his first name.
Yeah.
Because
Rabbi Schatz helped me with that as well for a friend of our family, where we did a name change.
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated because everyone knows this person by one name. He's, not a young person, and it's like that's not his name anymore. That's yeah. Dad,
Yeah,
you say something? Or?
As soon as she saw her old boyfriend on the bus, I thought, oh, the bread helped, the challah helped.
It might have. Hope is not lost, right? There's still a month.
He's getting married.
In a month.
Yeah.
Plenty of time.
Yeah.
Okay, Rebecca and Leonard.
Yeah, I was just going to share at our wedding, any of the unmarried women could come up at the end of the reception after we did the Sheva Brachot and have a sip of wine from my wine glass, from the bride's cup.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's also, in terms of sometimes, and maybe this actually comes from the wine custom, I know a lot of women, again, who will go under the chuppah and either say a blessing or ask for a blessing to be underneath the chuppah, to feel as if you are also going to be under the chuppah soon. Again, these are all things I've never done in my life. I don't know if they would have been,
I'm recalling a friend's bris a friend's baby's bris in Israel. I think it was a bris, yeah. And her, meaning I know it was some kind of a baby name.
Okay, lots of jokes. It's fine.
Her father was the sandak, and I remember as soon as the bris was over, everybody, like every single person in the shul, lined up to get a bracha from him. And I had never met the father.
Yeah.
So he had actually started rabbinical school at HUC and then became frum in his year in Israel and made Aliyah and moved to the West Bank. And that's this friend's father. My dad
quite the pivot.
Yeah, quite a pivot. But I had never met him. I knew this friend she was like mishlachet at camp. At Ramah, because her dad wanted her to experience some American Judaism, whatever. But yeah, I remember every single person getting in line, and I was like, do I get in line? I don't know this guy, I don't know. But that, every single person got a blessing from the sandak, And
did you get a blessing?
A real blessing. He not a 10-second. It was a thing.
Did you get one?
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you don't remember if it was a bris or not?
No, it was a bris. That's why I was it was a sandak, so it had to be a bris,
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure we went back to that. It's just a bris is a pretty memorable event, so I just want to make sure.
Go to a lot of
Rachel.
When someone brought up the segula of name change when you're sick, are there any other reasons for name change? I've known 2 women over the years. One added a middle name, and the other one changed her name completely as part of a coming out ritual as a gay person.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, just what are the guidelines for name changes, if there are any?
Yeah. Rabbi Pernick is laughing, so maybe he has something to share.
I'm hoping you have an answer to this question because I don't. That's why I'm laughing.
Really? Because I was about to say, you and I have talked about this topic in a class somewhere, somehow, and I don't remember where it was, but you and I have spoken about this.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, well, I remember, and I will answer. So yes is the answer. The parameters, I don't believe so. I mean, in terms of why it might happen, just life changes, I think, is a reason for people to modify or to change or to alter their name. There's also a spiritual practice, and potentially it's a segula. I don't actually know what the terminology is for it, but that you would ward away the evil eye by changing your name. So if you are, let's say, going through cancer treatment and then make it out as a survivor of cancer, you might change your name so that cancer can't find you again. I know a few. Go ahead.
Medical aspect.
Right. So I know a few women who have changed their names when they started rabbinical school, actually, they just chose to go by their Hebrew name instead of their English name, but changed it, actually, and one man, changed it legally so that it was marking this new journey for them in their life. There's this new identity. So again, I don't know if there are specific parameters for it, but I do know that those are the reasons in which people do it. And there are, if the evil eye is involved, it's a segula. Yeah, that's probably true.
Red string, definitely a segula.
Yeah. So I think yes is the answer. You don't remember that at all, talking about that? I think you were the one who brought up the evil eye. Anyway, okay. Yeah, Jeff.
Would this qualify as a segula? When I was a kid and I get dressed up to go out, my mother would say, oh, you have a thread hanging off your jacket. And before she'd cut it, she'd give me a piece of bread or something to chew. She wouldn't ever cut a thread off my clothes. So there was something about chewing on a piece of bread or something like that to ward off something evil or something bad happening to me.
Well, that sounds like the Gemara that Rabbi Pernick shared earlier in terms of bread and going on a journey.
Something about not cutting a garment that someone's wearing is like definitely a thing. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like a thing about, again, it's one of these.
At a funeral, like when you do kriya, you cut your garment or someone cuts it for you. So is that why?
No. Maybe, but it's definitely a thing about like not cutting a thread of clothing that's on someone, even if it's not like dangerous. So yeah, that definitely sounds like a segula. I mentioned here, Rabbi Silver, Deborah Silver, who I think a lot of the LA people, some LA people, maybe, no?
Yeah, you're right.
She has a friend who wrote a book and about Orthodox women's religious practices, and she spoke at like a Zoom joint program with Shir Chadash, the conservative synagogue here, and my synagogue, and she talked about it as part of her book about Orthodox women's religious practices. There was a lot of the focus ended up being on home-based rituals, a lot of which would sort of fall in this category of segulot. And as part of her research, she basically had a list of like segulot that she knew, and then she asked people, check off any of these that you know, and also add any others that come to mind. So Denise's girls davening. So part of the book was about, davening, but there were also the idea is that there's a lot of sort of home-based religious ritual that's not specifically davening, but it would count as, people would see it as religious ritual. Things like, right, separating challah, which is a mitzvah, but like saying all these blessings around separating the challah, or all these additional blessings that you say when you're lighting candles, or things like throwing salt over your shoulder, or things like that. And she said in the course of her research, she sent a survey and asked people, to ask people, if there's any other things that come to mind. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Kananahara of like.
Wait, just finish one thought.
Sorry, I should close the chat.
Yeah, okay. Very hard to follow you if you keep answering the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but she said as she was asking people to fill out the survey, and she said, if there's any others that come to mind, add them to your response. And like, so she ended up with a list of like hundreds of things that. People said that their, boobies did, or their, along those lines of, you might call superstitions, but they were sort of part of their religious life, which is, I think, an important, for some people, segulot are like a big part of their religious life, that they might not go to shul, but these kinds of things, right? It's like these, sort of home-based rituals almost.
Okay, now you can answer your dad.
The Kanai yeah, I think the way of saying, certain things like Kanai Nahara, or right, Kanai Nahara is right against the ayin hara, right? So it's sort of the same. That's like a verbal. Again, would it formally be called a segula? I don't know. It's like hard to figure out where that line is drawn. But like, yeah, certain things that are
intended. The breaking a glass at a wedding.
Yeah.
To go back to if you go back to the original, not to commemorate the destruction of the temple, but if one goes. With the idea to keep away the demons or the bad luck, or, you don't want to jinx things. That's something good.
For sure. And it's also not a piece of a wedding that you have to do. It's just a piece of a wedding now that everyone thinks you have to do because everyone does it. But for sure, that's where it came from. Your son is not as convinced that that's for sure where it came from, but I am sure that is where it came from.
That makes sense. I can see that.
I mean, there's just...
We have a lot of demons in our... What?
It's all anthropological. The idea that anytime there's anything positive, you see a baby or you say anything good, it kind of like invites in all the evil spirits.
Yeah.
And so you either say Kananahara or you go poo poo poo, or you put the red string, or when our kids were born, Josh's booby would put like a red doll in the bassinet, because somehow the red had the power to keep away all the evil demons. So yeah, there are all these things.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up not being a demon child. So,
you ask your younger brother, it wasn't successful.
The jury's still out. Denise.
Oh, I was just going to say two things. One, in relation to Rabbi Pernick Sr. from the anthro perspective. Anthro perspective. There's something called indexical magic, which is exactly Segulas. It's if you do something to this thing and it symbolizes that thing, it'll have an impact on that thing, whatever it symbolizes. So, and it's like all the cultures do it. And then as far as the wedding goes, like maybe the glass may or may not be a segula, but then if people take home pieces of the glass for a bracha, that's a segula.
That's interesting, yeah.
Though I think it could still be a segula even if you don't take something from it, because the idea of it being at a joyful event and warding away that evil eye, that's what, again, every rabbi says something different about the breaking of the glass before it happens. So I typically don't talk about the evil eye right before someone breaks the glass under the chuppah, but I do think that there is a connection to the idea of warding away the evil eye by making that loud noise, which you hear about in medieval literature also, not just Jewish literature, but different ways in which like the spirits would go away if you make
even the shofar, the red shofar has elements of that also.
Yeah. But again, I think that all. You're right, Denise, that usually it's something that you either do for yourself or that you take into your home or eat challah. But that I think that this might be an aspect of that just in a happy moment, you also bring in that moment of destruction.
Yeah. But I think it's also nice that there's an idea of like at your happiest moment, including people and wanting to pray for them and wanting good things for people. And I don't know, I think that's really beautiful.
Well, and even more so to take that to even the next level, that you actually have the power, like the sandak at the now we know bris, or the bride at her wedding, but that you actually have special connection and power with God in those moments. And so not only can you bring in those kind of opposite feelings, whether it's a happy moment to a sad something or to bring healing to somebody in a very joyous occasion, but that you yourself have the power to do that because of the moment that you're going through is in and of itself kind of a mystical understanding.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think there is sort of that beautiful idea of, like the way that you are, in your time of celebration, it's never just about you. Shlisel Chal is totally a segula to Renee's question.
Yes,
averting your eyes, to not look at Kohanim, totally a segula.
During Duchanin, do people know what we're talking about when we say that? Do people? Yeah, no. So, would you like to explain this?
Sure. When the Kohanim do Birkat Kohanim, or Duchanin, as we call it, they sort of have their hands up, and you're supposed to sort of not be looking up at them when they're duchening, when they're blessing the nation, blessing the people. I remember my first duchening experience that I remember. We were at my uncle's synagogue in Boston, and the Kohanim were duchening, and my uncle was like, "Don't look up," and and my little brother looked up, and his nose started bleeding like immediately, and it was we're like, that's what happens. Yeah, so. It works. It does work.
Other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Renee.
Not a question. It was just kind of humorous. One of my cousins married a non-Jew, and my great aunt was obviously very much against that. And so when it came to breaking the glass at the wedding, the glass went through his foot. Convinced was a segula that they should never have been together to begin with.
Oy,
Dad, you have
terrible.
some stories along those lines, don't you? Okay, you were going to share.
Tons of them.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yes.
Wow. Stu Ray. You have to unmute first. I think you might be talking, but you have to unmute. Oh, you're still showing the book. Just unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I have a cousin that wrote a book, the Segulot, the Gift. And one of his things he asked me, did I ever grow up with my mother or somebody saying a Kenahara? And I said all the time. And he said his mother would say like ni or whatever before she would say Kenahara, meaning not to do it, not a Kenahara, in case it was an evil eye type thing, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Had anybody ever heard of the challah bit that you saw in the episode? No? Yes, Renee had.
Yeah.
Denise had.
I had not. It was new to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I had heard of it, never experienced it, but similar.
Isn't wedding cake similar? I think there's a wedding cake thing also. Maybe. I don't know.
Do you take home wedding cake?
Maybe not.
I don't think so. Oh, what you mean? I think if I can interpret what I think.
Some people I know save their wedding cake. And,
but that's the couple.
No, I know that's a different thing.
Oh, okay, great. But I don't think it's for like good luck. I think it's just so you can have wedding cake in a year. Seems, yeah, okay. I lost my train of thought, Josh. Okay, yeah, Michael, go ahead. I
have a question. I put it up in the chat first to just Senior Rabbi Pernick and then to everyone. And I'm curious if either of any of the three rabbis, four rabbis, Rabbi Barbara wants to comment. And that is that Hodaya was allowed to supervise a class while it was davening. And I know she wasn't teaching a religious class, but given how the headmistress is so firm that Hodaya is only teaching secular subjects because she's non-religious, I was a little bit surprised that she was allowed to be the teacher in the room at that moment.
Yeah, they talked about it during her interview, right? They said, just so you know, you're going to have to be at Tefillah, once or twice a week.
I remember that. Yeah. But still, it surprised me a little bit they'd let her do that.
She even does the whole knocking the table and saying Yala V'Yavo. So she's got it down. She knows.
I think in Israel specifically, you don't necessarily have to be from to know how to daven. And so for them, I think and also remember she grew up from. So I think that they're able to feel as though she's going to know what to do and the choreography, and clearly when it's Rosh Chodesh, but that whether or not she's actually davening or that would be her practice, she knows how to help them daven because she grew up around it. She sees it happen around Israel all the time. It just isn't as unknown of a factor as I think it is in America. And it's also not that she's not Jewish. So, yeah.
My only surprise was that the headmistress would, quote unquote, trust her in that role, given the fact that the headmistress knows she's not religiously observant at all. Forget about from.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of sort of keeping the decorum. Yeah. They're sort of davening on their own. My dad brought up, and I had forgotten I think it was the first season of Srugim where Yifat, who finds out they didn't have a kiddush for her when she was born, and that's why she's not married yet, right? People remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole thing. So totally, right? That is exactly the same kind of.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, me too.
Denise.
So back to Hodaya, I remember at the interview, they were asking her in general about the religious environment and midot and things like this. And she says, I think I can give it over. She says that to the headmistress in her interview. And it struck me because I believed this the whole time. Sorry, there's a siren. I believed this the whole time that Hodaya isn't necessarily a person without faith. I think a lot of what she's rejecting, I know people who've done this, even my grandfather did this, is rejecting the strictness around it. And you have to reject the religiousness because it's part of the package. But I don't think that in her depths, she's necessarily an atheist. I think she just doesn't want that whole package. And so it just made me wonder, if maybe the headmistress senses that, or if even the headmistress is kind of giving her a little bit of space to figure out her own relationship to all that stuff.
Yeah, I would also say that, and Rabbi Pernick can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would also say in the frum world, if you grew up frum and then you decide to get less frum or even become secular, the frum world already they assume that you're going to either come back to the frum world or that you have enough knowledge and you're just choosing not to use it. The opposite is harder for the frum world, that you didn't grow up frum and now you have to prove yourself to be frum. And that is more skeptical in the frum world's mind, because how do you know how to be frum if you didn't grow up that way? And so prove yourself to us that you really are frum, that you don't, use lights on Shabbat and you don't rip toilet paper and all these kinds of things. Prove that to us, and therefore you are frum. Whereas the opposite, I think, there's a certain sense of you'll come back to us. And so what the headmaster, in my opinion, I don't know if this is true, but in my opinion, what the headmaster is showing us is that even though she's not from currently, Hodaya is not currently from, that she has the knowledge, she has the connection, she just needs to tap back into it, I think.
Totally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think even the whole thing with the challah, it's like, oh, you don't have to be right. There's 100% an assumption that she's going to become, she's going to come. The fact that she's in a ulpana, in a girls' high school, like they all assume she's going to come back to being from. And it's sort of like, we're allowing that opportunity. Okay, you don't have to do it. Just hang out while they're davening and write all of this. It'll like, yeah, but I definitely agree with Rabbi Schatz about the idea that someone who was raised secular would be a different story. But here it's like, she knows to knock on the table and say, Ya'alev Yavo, right? Like she knows what's going on. And also there's an assumption that this is going to be part of her process of coming back.
Does everyone know what Ya'alev Yavo is? No. Okay. So Ya'alev Yavo is a part of the liturgy that's inserted for them. That particular day was for Rosh Chodesh. So
tonight.
What?
Tonight. Rosh Chodesh.
Yes, but I'm talking about the episode.
Tonight's Rosh Chodesh.
Tonight also begins Rosh Chodesh.
When they daven Mariv later, it's Rosh Chodesh.
Yes. Oh, yes. When you all daven Mariv later, and for those of you on the podcast who will daven Shacharit in the morning, you will say Ya'alev Yavo, whether that's in Birkat HaMazon, if you're going to eat and bench afterwards, or if you're davening, you would insert Ya'alev Yavo into the Amidah. And so what Rabbi Pernick is pointing out is that you don't want to speak. My congregants know this. I don't know who else does, but you don't usually speak in between the Baruch Hu and the end of the Amidah, because you don't want to make a hefsek. You don't want to have any kind of page number calling or anything like that in between. And so you bang on the table to let people know that they should insert Ya'alev Yavo if they've forgotten that it's Rosh Chodesh in that particular scene. So tomorrow morning, if you're at Temple Beth Am Minyan, we will bang on the table and say Ya'alev Yavo so that people remember to insert that. And I just remember that means I have to be at Minyan 15 minutes earlier, which is never fun. Okay, yes, Rebecca.
So I remember as our daughter went to Pressman Academy, the day school at our conservative shul, I remember, so in elementary school, as they were learning tefillot, the prayers in Hebrew, it was their Hebrew teachers, their Hebrew language teachers who were teaching them. And in several cases, these were Israeli native Hebrew speakers that taught them Hebrew, and they were not observant. But they knew the tunes, they taught them. That was part of what they were doing and leading in the prayers. And then when there'd be some sort of a, culmination or something, and services, and they would do that. So I remember thinking at first, oh, this is kind of strange. It's like a secular Hebrew teacher who's teaching them tefillot, but then it wasn't strange. So it was just part of what they were teaching them.
Right. And so much of a day school education is also the language around the tefillot, not necessarily the practice of their halacha around. And so, though it seems strange, it also, similar to what Hodaya is doing, she's really just in charge of the choreography, just to make sure that they know when to stand, when to sit, when to say certain things. She's not the shach, right? She's not leading the davening. She's just there. She's just there to make sure the choreography happens. I just want to mention one more thing about the topic before people can share other thoughts. But one thing that I haven't said yet, I think that one of the elements of believing in or practicing these different segulot is the idea of false hope, and that people can really pour themselves into this idea of, if I eat that challah, the next man I see is going to be my husband. Or if I give that name to the sandak at a bris, for sure that person is going to be healed. And not that we necessarily believe that, right? Not that we are so naive to think, oh, of course that's going to be true, but that you put your hope into those moments. And I think for some of us, that's hard. I know for me personally, that's a very hard thing to buy into, that you would have different elements, even like zodiac type horoscope, I guess is what you would call it, type things where you can look up your horoscope and it's going to tell you what's happening for you that month. Some people love that. For me, it's a very difficult thing, because then you learn something about yourself from some random, magazine writer. And all of a sudden now everything that you see throughout that week, you think somehow has to have a meaning or a sign or a this or that. And so, not to say that they're not important or not valuable to people's belief system and ways of connecting to their own identities or to their future. But I think that there also are pieces that can be small d dangerous in terms of putting all of your hope and all of your energy into these types of superstitions, similar to the checking of the mezuzahs, right? If there's something really wrong, God forbid, with someone in your home, and you check your mezuzah and it, has worn away, because that's what happens to mezuzahs, for you to believe that that's the only reason that the person in your home is sick, it is naive in a way. So I think that to me is the challenge with these types of superstitions. And not to say that I don't play into them or don't think of them sometimes or see connections to them sometimes, but I do think there's elements of false hope. And one last thing, today would have been my uncle's 61st birthday. And my aunt, since he died a few years ago, whenever she sees a hummingbird, she thinks of him. They had a thing with a hummingbird once. And so then when he died, every time she sees a hummingbird, she feels like he's there with her. And I don't know that I buy into that, but every time I see a hummingbird, I think of my uncle. And so I think there are elements of these segulot that even if you don't 100% buy into them, you do want to have an element of hope in them or want them to be true, because that's what they're there for. They're there to make you feel like you can change something, or something's going to be good for you in the future, or someone's going to get better. So I just wanted to add that little piece. It can give you comfort. Exactly right, Judy. Exactly. That was all. DBART. Any other thoughts, comments? Hi, Debbie. Okay.
I was going to say, so that it gives you comfort and you kind of maybe want to believe in it, is why, I don't know if we said how Hodaya at the very end, when she retrieved something that she threw into the sink, I didn't really realize what that was, but it turned out it was the challah. So she went to it and she, was eating some, and, the last two scenes or whatever. So it's like, okay, you never know. Maybe this might help. And
it doesn't hurt, right? Often people say it doesn't hurt. All right.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Inserting a prayer at the kotel. Oh man. Yeah. I don't know if that's, I don't know. Would you consider that a segula?
I mean, I'm also thinking about like Kaddish, right? There are ways in which saying Kaddish every minyan, right? It's like it's a late addition to the Jewish liturgical process. Kaddish generally, and a mourner dafka saying Kaddish. Like all these things are like much later additions, but so there's very much that kind of like, I need to do this, and people will freak out if they miss a minyan. Some people are like, I do it 3 times a day, every day, and if I miss it, it's like, I'm letting my loved one down. Right? That's a thing that people feel. So there's a similar element there. Does that make it a segula? I don't know. I mean, it's supposed to be a zechut, merit for them. So it's kind of I would say, a similar category. And there's ways in which these different categories of things do kind of blend together. And sometimes they blend together in ways you're like, oh, that seems, I don't know, problematic or so forth. So, right, and I think certainly they don't fall within a rationalistic approach to Judaism, but so much of what we do doesn't fit a purely Maimonidean rationalist framework. So and
allows you connection maybe when you don't feel like you have one. Like that's what I think kotel notes are, right? That you're kind of going to the source, or at least people believe they're going to the source.
But when somebody, for example, has problems becoming pregnant, and that was something that we had, it seems hard to believe now, but, originally. And so, Ruthie's aunt, put a kvittel in the kotel. And some women will pray at Rachel's tomb or at different sites, because these were people who were associated. And that's the idea, that by doing that at that particular place, it'll bring about the result.
Right. I mean, similar to what Josh said, like it doesn't hurt, right? And if you're in a place of really wanting something that you haven't received in all the other ways that you've asked for it, whether that's prayer or medical intervention or, whatever it is, you might as well do the thing that sometimes has worked for somebody that hopefully could then work for you too. I don't think there's anything wrong with them whatsoever. And I think that there's deep meaning in connecting yourself to those different customs.
Or getting a bracha from a Rav, from like a big Rav. It's not a rabbi, but
a big Rav
with a
beard,
unshaven. Yeah,
you don't have a beard, so you can't be a Rav.
A little bit of a beard.
I also can't be a Rav. Okay, Denise.
I think that sometimes just being open to those kinds of segulas or brachos or different things. I think just the act of doing it, like even Horeya, when she picked the challah from the sink, it softens you a little bit, you know? It just gets you more connected to that place in your heart that feels like, who knows what's possible, and miracles can happen at any moment, and butterflies can land on your shoulder, and all those kinds of California thoughts.
Yeah.
And in that way, I think they can be very effective because it just makes you more of open and receptive, and you might talk more openly to somebody than you otherwise would have because you're just in a different place or things like that.
Yeah.
It might humble you. It humbles you a little bit, I think.
True. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you feel like you need to be connected to something bigger than yourself, which is that humility piece, that you aren't the only person who can have control over whatever is happening, but that you need that guidance and that support and that help elsewhere.
Oh.
Yeah, like it just makes you feel like the world is a good, friendly place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This became such a nice topic, Rabbi Pernick.
Yes, schools are always good. It never hurts to talk about schools.
Very good. Bringing it back.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.